You're listening to Multifamily with Mosley. Today, we'll be joined by Todd Spatalny, our host, and Director of Construction at Mosley Multifamily, Mike Bill, as they discuss how to find the right team for your project. Let's listen in.
This week's episode of Multifamily by Mosley. Today we've got Mike Bill, our head of construction, here with us today. I'm the host, Todd Spatalny, Director of Sales. Mike, welcome to the show.
I appreciate it.
So let's go ahead and kick this off, because one thing I've always wanted to know that we've never really talked about is how did you end up in this industry, multifamily?
I owned my own construction company focusing on residential renovations. Decided that I wanted to dabble in the commercial industry. Decided to sell my company and move on to multifamily renovations.
It's funny. Like I think you and I don't think I ever really truly knew that. We come from a similar background. Like I own my own company as well. Unfortunately, I wasn't as lucky to sell my company. I wound up having to, get out of it. And we're going to kind of talk about why here in a minute. Because what you're on today to talk about is hiring for scale. So, as we kind of go through this, it'll kind of come clear as to why it's a perfect topic for us to be talking about today. You talked about how you got into the industry. What's the biggest challenge you're seeing in the market right now that's facing our customers when it comes to hiring contractors?
As far as hiring the contractors themselves, making sure that they have the manpower that they're going to say they have to keep up with the renovations.
When you're saying that, what do you mean by hiring the right size? What does that mean?
What type of volume has a contractor previously done? Are they used to doing more turnover work, partial renovations, or doing full renovations? Are they at a bunch of projects that are just doing 1 to 2 units a month, or are they at a project that's consistently doing 12 units plus a month and then peak season doing 15 or 20?
Gotcha. So that's one thing that we hear all the time, because on the sales side, we're always asking the question, how many units are you going to do next year? How many are you going to do this? How many are you going to do that? So I guess the real question comes in is given that our market, our industry, we know that there's a slow period, there's a high season, right? What happens when the biggest mistake when you hire that small contractor in January that's doing 2 or 3 units? What's the biggest mistake that happens come May?
Hiring that contractor is the biggest mistake. I mean, it sounds very blunt, but it is. If they're coming in and thinking that schedule is going to maintain 1 to 2, and then during peak season they're hit with 8 and they need to quadruple their manpower, have they trained that additional manpower to be able to handle that? Do they even have that extra manpower to handle that?
Yeah, I understand that. That's great. I mean, but when we're talking about, let's just say they can hire it. But what's the challenge then? If they've hired 10 new guys to show up and do the work, what's the challenge?
If you don't have processes in place to manage that, with whether it's supervision, whether it's procurement and ordering materials, how do you handle that extra volume if you're not prepared for it? You can have the guy swinging hammers in the field, but how are you doing the quality control? How are you doing the quality assurance if you're not used to that? Doing that for 1 to 2 units is not the same thing as doing it for 10 plus units. Just because you have the guy swinging hammers doesn't mean that there's not a whole lot in the background that has to happen as well.
And I would think that in that relation too, right, the speed of that, right, as you kind of go forward, what happens to the speed of those units as they start to increase?
You can lose pace real quick. If you don't have a production schedule that's granular down to what needs to happen every 15 minutes, for the duration of that renovation to hit it and make it complete, get the unit complete on time, you're never going to be successful. If you can't do that for 1 to 2 units, you're never going to do that for 10.
Well, and I guess my question there is if it's really that broken down, how come it's not repeatable? How come someone can't just repeat that process?
Well, it depends on who you're talking to. We can complete that process and do that process. That's how we do it here at Mosley, is we break it down to what needs to happen every 15 minutes in a unit renovation from start to finish. So it doesn't really answer your question because it can be done. It's just if you don't have the process in place to get it done.
So, but then how do you ensure as you're going up in units, right, that the consistency remains the same? What is it that you do to make sure that consistency remains the same through unit 1 to unit 15 every month?
processes in place from pre-walking that unit to making sure you make sure that anything hidden site conditions or any change orders are known up front if there are any. Getting the materials ordered in a timely manner, to forecasting out your schedule, staggering it out however you need to stretch your manpower if you're a little short, or making it, I don't even know, hold on, in a minute. I would say it's exactly that, stretching out.
Listen, I get it. Like it's hard to put in words the process because it's simple. As we talk about this and we go through this, and as we develop that scope of consistency, the behaviors, the training programs, to get every one of our crews, every one of our superintendents on the same page, it's tough to kind of, because we're one of the few that are actually doing this, demanding it and expecting it. I know that on the sales side, I literally talk about your process when I'm talking with the client in development. So when we're talking about developing scale, they want to get an ROI of, they want to do a complete project in 3 years. Great. In order to do that, we need to do this. We're developing from the start what our man hours are, what our time frame is up front, and then you're hiring the right superintendent that fits that need to the scope.
Correct, and we're forecasting out what our man-hour needs are for 3 months in advance. So working with our customers to give us, let us know as much notice as we can, so we can forecast out manpower. If I know I can take guys for one project because it's slowing down and push them to another project that's ramping up. So communication's key with that.
Right. I mean, so one of the big problems that we see all the time is lack of notice to start units to make sure that all of that ramp up is like, I had a conversation with Nick, who's our lead estimator in another podcast, and was talking about it and that lead time of material now that because of COVID is now 45, 60-day lead time to start projects. We have got to get into those units earlier. How are you handling that process with a customer to make sure that that's getting done?
Communication. Every single day, as a process, we're asking, has there been any changes to the schedule? Are there any new units that, you guys need to add to the production schedule? And communicating that with them. As soon as they say yes, we're getting in there. So it's a question that we're asking every single day, not to, pick on them or get on the property managers about, hey, we need more units, just make sure we're staying on top of our game and we can properly forecast out our needs properly.
So your team's not running to Home Depot every day to pick up materials and hey, we're picking this finish, we're picking that finish. I mean, you guys are planning that 30, 40 days ahead at notice or as much as you can.
Correct.
In order to do it. So is that, but that also leads kind of into what happens when you go from 15 units to 30 units or 1 unit to 5 units in a month. Who's handling that? Who's doing that? Who's ordering the material? Who's doing that? Who's training it?
So, it's a team effort. It doesn't matter what company you're in. It takes a team to do anything along those lines. So from procurement, making sure that he has everything dialed in so it's a click of a button to send out POs and get all the materials that we need. Working with different vendors, so we're not just keeping independent on a single vendor. We have multiple avenues to be able to order materials from. So that's from the material side. From the labor side, having a great labor force recruiter, a team to vet and obtain new talent from our superintendents, managing that process and getting accustomed to increase in volume, but a training program. The training program is key.
So you just said something really important that I caught that I wouldn't, So you guys use a recruitment manager. Is that in-house? Is that outsourced? How is that done?
No, it's in-house. So we have a full-time recruiter for superintendents as well as labor. Without them, it would be very challenging to maintain a schedule.
Yeah, so and I guess that's kind of the point though, right? As we're talking about, you have a dedicated team, you have a dedicated person that's only job is to find, attract, hire, and then you have people to train our crews to make sure that we have enough people to handle that flux and movement and change. And I think that if you're a turn company, that likes that's taking over a project, I'm not sure that you have that ability. Is that correct? How hard it would be for a painter to go out and just hire carpenters?
There's a reason why they're a painter. They stick to what you're good at and what you're successful at. Don't chase shiny objects. If you're really good at painting, continue painting. If you're not good at carpentry, don't try doing it just to try to tell your customer that you can.
Right.
You're setting yourself up for failure if you're just over-promising and under-delivering.
We've seen that in our industry quite a bit. One of the big things that we see a lot of people doing when they're hiring smaller crews is they piecemeal out all the work.
Just draws out that schedule. If you have to call a new painter in and wait for them to come in and paint, you're calling a flooring company in to come in and do the flooring, it's on average at least 50% twice the time it takes to do a unit if you can just train everybody to do it in-house.
But obviously there are things that, that you piecemeal out, right? Like granite, right? Because we're not doing that in-house. But when it comes to, your team, I believe, has painters, tile guys, carpenters, all of them inside of every team that can do it, electricians, everyone's trained and go. I mean, is that accurate? That you're training your guys to do all that in-house?
So correct. We lean heavily on our foremen to train and develop, the team members beneath them. So all of our foremen are fully competent in doing just about all aspects of the trades that are required to do a renovation. They have to duplicate themselves. They have to be able to train the guys that they're working with to be able to do the same thing, or else you get stuck piecemealing. And again, it doesn't work.
So it's a truly important thing that I think that our partners in the market and our industry need to hear. One of the questions that I believe that should be asked every single time of that contractor when they're about to hire: what is your training program for your crews? What is your on-site management? Because you and I were in a conversation with a partner not long ago, and we talked about our training program, and they're like, "Well, you guys do all that?" And I'm like, "Yes, we have to."
I always tell everybody, do you want 500 guys doing it 500 different ways, or do you want 500 guys doing it one way?
And I
How
think
do you
that's,
manage it?
and I think that's where, it's like, we ran into some challenge, especially with the hurricane, where we had to change out crews because of issues down in Florida. But I think that we were able to pick right back up with a crew that had never even been on that site. And I think that's going to what you're talking about, right? Because we do it the same way over and over. That new crew that we transferred into that project from another project was able to pick up, and we never lost
The ramp up time doing it that way is minimal. It's a lot. It's a less ramp up time. So even if they're not on that project, but we're doing it the same way every single project, it's not going to take them time to ramp up and get up to speed on a new project. They're familiar with our process, doesn't change.
I think that that's something we don't talk about enough. In all honesty, I think that we should be talking about that more with our partners and other people in the industry, because I think that that's tremendous value, and I don't know that we're doing enough of that. Maybe that's a note that we need to start talking about in every conversation we have about that program, about making sure, and I think that's got value. That's awesome. When you're hiring that smaller contract, we're talking about that volume change. We've talked about, I think we've beaten that in there. But in the hiring process, one of the biggest mistakes that we keep seeing is the low bidder effect, right? It's, and one of the things, and we had this conversation a little bit ago with a partner, and they said, well, you guys are about 8%, 10% higher on the bid. And I asked the question, let's compare apples to apples, right? And sure enough, they didn't even have on-site superintendents full-time, right? So that's a cost factor. They went and used inferior product on a situation that they didn't even meet the spec. One of the things they don't do, and I think that, in talking with a bunch of asset managers over the last week, they care about that number, but they're not looking at the lowest bidder effect, right? I mean, what does that do when you are the lowest bidder and you're not having everything in there? What's eliminated as you're putting that low bid out there? What's missing?
There's a lot of consequences in this to going with the lowest bidder. A big one is supervision. Do they have that full-time superintendent that, something happens, they're there to take care of it. They have the communication with the customer every single day to update the schedule, let them know what's going on, have meetings with them. If their materials are needed, they can run out and go get it. Big aspect, you don't have supervision, not saying the project can't be done, but it's not going to be done as effectively or as efficiently if you have that full-time trained superintendent on the project.
Well, if you don't have full-time supervision, how do you ensure that the consistency is there? How does that work?
You're relying on your customer and your crews to do that for you.
So basically, what happens to our customer? They have to then spend money to manage the process. Is what you're telling me?
There's if you don't have that supervision there to be able to communicate with the customer and update the customer and help the customer, it's falling back on the customer to take care of.
So that's a huge hidden cost that I don't think people equate to, or incomplete scopes, right? Because usually a low bidder means they left something out of the scope. They missed a big topic. Like yesterday when we talked about it, we had the subfloor issue down in Richmond. No one expected that to be done, but we were able to determine that's an issue. Now we've got to go back and fix. Well, that's a cost that's unexpected, right? But what happens if
a hidden site condition change order is not the same thing as just missing scope entirely,
right? So
your bid looks better. When we're demoing out a unit and the subfloor is completely rotten through and you can't see that with finishes, in place, different type of change order.
Yeah, it's funny. So, we also talk about we had the situation at another property where we took over the job. The plumbing that they were putting in, they were keeping the same slope. They were keep doing it right. They were putting in
positive slope instead of negative slope. So back to an appliance.
And again, those are consistent things you're going to get with low bidders. Like, listen, there are people that can do it cheaper.
There's a reason why it's cheaper.
Right. I just, for me, I'm kind of like, hey, wait a minute, hold on. You got to ask those questions. And then there's the change order kings. Those guys, they're intentionally coming in as low bidders.
Nickel and dime you.
Nickel and dime you out. And it's stuff that you shouldn't be doing, right? Or they intentionally did it. Like, what are the things that you see? Because you've been in the industry a long time. I've been in for over 20 some odd years. What are those lovely change orders that keep kicking up that done intentionally to get the win?
I mean, it's across the board. There's everything and anything that comes to renovation. I mean, if they think that they're getting pre-hung doors and they only put door slabs in, so they said, why is all the jamb and casing old? Well, they went under the assumption that it was going to be pre-hungs and you supplied slabs to put in. Back on doors, not providing new hardware, hinges, door stops that should be in every single customer, every single renovation that you do, you should be providing those materials and installing. Drywall repairs that they 2 hours of drywall repairs what they have in their budget to do it, and we all know a standard renovation is 8 to 10 hours is what you should be thinking of when it comes to repairing drywall.
So how do our customers protect themselves against the change order kings during the bidding process?
Make sure they ask the right questions. Make sure that the bids are broken down to the point where they can see and flag questions. Transparency is everything. So, in our proposals, we have what amount of hours are included in our drywall prep, asking the right questions.
And I think that's kind of a key thing is, and even in the contracts are written to protect one party over the other. We all know that, right? One of the things that we talk about is making sure that the scope of work gets included directly into the contract, demanding it, make sure the finish schedule is included in there as well.
Doing a mock-up so everybody's on the same page before you go underneath full production.
Man, mock-ups, everyone for years hated doing mock-ups. They thought it was like, oh my God, why am I doing mock-ups? I'm never going to get the job.
Well, but there's that bitter sweet thing about mock-ups because mock-ups take the longest to do.
And you lose money every time on a mock.
So, customers' expectation is 15 days and, your mock-up takes 21 days to do, but you're going back and forth, making changes, making sure that's the right product and that's exactly what they're expecting. And you drop the day count down once you're under production.
I remember one of our very first jobs when you and I were working together here was down in Virginia Beach for a brand new customer. We had 2 units that we were doing. We redid that mock unit
30 changes at least
3 times completely just to get to the finalized scope. Every time they walked in, man, this looks great.
But
let's change the floor. Okay, let's change the floor. Let's do that. You know what? I love the layout of the cabinets, but can we add an island? Yep, not a problem.
I don't really like the way that the laundry door swings. How about putting a barn door in?
You got it. We'll do it. But literally, that is still like the ultimate, that was probably the longest process I've ever seen on a mock unit.
I have a love-hate relationship with mock-ups. They're extremely important to the process and to the project startup.
Yeah.
But you also hate them.
I mean, every time we've done a project without a mock-up, we've had a rough start. It's brain damage, right? That mock unit, but every time, even for the same customer, somebody's like, oh, we just got to go. Great, we do it, and every time, and we have tremendous trust, and they have tremendous in us that we're going to always make it right. But every time we haven't done a mock unit, that first 120 days has been like someone hitting you with a frying pan on top of the head every day, right? It's just painful.
We have customers where we do the same thing nationwide for them, and yet we still do a mock-up, even though that same thing that we're doing in Florida, we're doing in Indianapolis, and we're doing in Pennsylvania. Yeah. It doesn't matter.
We've gotten it. I know that literally we had the conversation like, if it's not written in there that we were requiring doing a mock-up unit, we should walk away from the project up front, right? Let's make sure we get it right. Let's make sure we're on the same page, because we can't afford those changes, and neither can they.
No, and I mean, we provide a very good finished package to them, with the proposal, but what looks good on paper may not look good installed. So getting it all put together and making sure that the property manager is happy, the asset manager is happy, the owner is happy, everybody's happy before you do that on scale hundreds and hundreds of times.
Yeah.
Extremely important.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that, we've talked about some incredible topics, right? We've talked about what happens to that contractor. And again, earlier I talked about, bringing back my experience as a former business owner. I was the wrong contractor. I was that guy when I owned my own company. I was that guy that had been in the kitchen industry and in the laminate industry and the stone industry for years. But I didn't have the wherewithal to be able to do 15, 20 units a month at one property and another. If you asked me to do 100 kitchens in a month, I could do it. But I didn't know how to do the tile efficiently. I didn't know how to do the painting efficiently. So I was piecemealing. I hired another guy. I hired a turn company to do my paint. They were terrible.
And then when that company is done and your flooring guy comes in and installs the flooring, and you got to call the painter back in because your walls are messed up, then you got to wait to schedule that, and then it just took 3 days.
It was, I landed a project with one of the nation's guys, and it was a $5 million project. This is back in 2012, and we started off. We were doing 4 units a month, and we were crushing it. And it was gorgeous.
Everybody crushes it with 2 to 4 units.
Oh my God, it was amazing. And then we added the next part of the phase, 2 to 4 units. We're doing all right. And then we added the third phase. Now we got a problem. Because now we're running into electrical issues because they had pigtailed the wires through each unit, so they were crisscrossed. Unit A affected Unit B, B affected A because they literally crisscrossed through the studs. Well, now we're trying to fix that problem, but they're still telling me I gotta do 15 units a month. I'm in trouble. I can't do it. So then I bring in an electrician to handle this. Then I bring in a tile guy to do this. Well, how about I do this? I can't do it, so I'll grab him. He'll do that. And next thing you know,
how do you manage that process, Todd?
As a business owner, I was literally on the site every day doing it.
You can't manage that process. I don't care who you are.
Oh, it was bad. I fell behind on the bills. I fell behind on this. I fell behind that because I'm a small guy. I don't have a sales staff. I don't have a foreman. I just have guys working for me. And then I didn't have the cash flow to maintain, because now I'm at my expenditures every month were roughly about $100,000 to $250,000 a month. I didn't have that in the bank. So as they started running through some potential banking issues and paying me, I'm now 45 units in there, and they're $500,000, to me. Well, what did I have to do? I had to literally take loan after loan after loan to stay floating. Well, I didn't get that money for 150 days.
It's too late.
I was done. At that point, that profit that I had made on that job was gone because I just paid it in loans and interest. And, I stayed floating for another 3 years, and I probably could have still stayed in there, but it was a scratcher every month. But I couldn't handle that. And I was that example of the wrong contractor. I see so many people that I'm looking at, and when I'm walking around these jobs, I'm like, holy crap, you're me. Get out now. Like, literally want to tell them, get out. You're going to lose everything you got. And I'm a pretty smart guy. I know the industry. I know how to do the job. But you can't do it like that.
we went through. I mean, we like building and developing processes and poking holes in them.
Yeah.
And poking holes in them and poking holes in them, because how do you get better?
Yeah.
You find a problem, you create a solution, and then you keep building on that solution until you never stop.
Well, the good news is I already did all the trial and error, and now we can just learn from that and be able to go forward.
But we've tried piecing out.
Yeah.
You know, and in order for us to really show value, we need to decrease the time that unit's down.
Right.
Piecemealing out doesn't decrease the time that unit's down.
Right.
Training and developing crews that can do full turn A to Z is how you get that schedule time down, get it back to the customer, and let them rent it.
Well, and the one piece that we don't talk about in this, right, is that cost. Every day that we're in production is a day they lose rent. There's a risk that they're willing to take, but when we're late, ultimately, that lateness is a day off the ability for them to lease it. That's an extra day of lost wages. That's an extra day of a leasing agent not getting their bonuses for hitting their mark at the end of the month. That's another day that manager is a decrease in vacancy rate. So, there's all these hidden things that you just don't see behind it that I don't think people account for. And I think that this is what we're talking about.
Right back to the lowest bidder.
Right.
They're the lowest bidder. How long are they going to take? How long are they going to take to do the renovation? Are they 30 days? Are they 45 days? Are they 15 days? Most of the time, those lowest bidder guys are, smaller crews, or they're piecemealing it out, which increases it, which again adds back to your cost. That's the longer that unit's down,
Right.
which goes back to cost. Are they truly the lowest bidder at that point?
Right. And I think that's one thing. And quite frankly, that's why we created this podcast, right? We want to talk about those things because ultimately what's happening is our customers are getting punished because they're not seeing the behind the scenes. They're not seeing that stuff. We want to put a light directly on those issues. We want to show them, hey, listen, if you're not accounting for the fact that you might have increased lead times, you might have inconsistent product that your team's having to go back in and fix, all those things.
They're going to be supervising the project partially. You're taking you away from your day-to-day.
Yeah, it ultimately, as we talk to our people all the time, is our leasing agents, our resident managers, our the maintenance supervisors, they have a job. Their job is to take care of those residents, to manage that property. They shouldn't be managing us.
Correct.
And when they manage us, that's costing them time and money. So that's a cost that doesn't account. And then we also, want to put a light on the fact that, hey, when you do it poorly the first time and you make wrong decisions from that,
You're paying for it twice.
you're going to pay for it twice inside 3 years. Congratulations. Let's stop that behavior, which is why we did this.
Or the inferior product. I mean, you're paying for that. You put down cheap flooring. I'm going to say cheap. They say inexpensive is the better term for it,
No, it was cheap.
But you put down cheap flooring. Well, next year, that LVP that everybody's switching to because they get, longevity out of it compared to doing full carpet. When you replace all that LVP next year because you went with a cheaper, inferior product, did you save money?
So I got to laugh at this one. This is pretty funny. So you and I were out in Pittsburgh not long ago. We were on a project, and flooring originally wasn't supposed to be part of the scope, right? And it was amazing. They just put down brand new LVP. It was great, yada yada yada, right? We walk into the very first unit, and the first thing I see is they use a very thin, LV glue down LVP that basically absorbed every bit of glue they used, and this thing's bubbled up all throughout the unit. And then they didn't float the floor. They went over top of some holes. I was just like, oh my goodness. And they said, well, we want to leave this. Sure.
And replace all your other finishes and.
Yeah. So this is getting left. The property manager walks in, looks at the asset manager, and says, "That's not staying. This can't stay." So it was something that they thought they had when they purchased the building, a great opportunity to keep and save money. It was the wrong one. We warned them up front. It sure enough had happened, and it was just like, guys, this is what we're telling you. Don't put in the wrong product. That product had been put in a year earlier.
No, they're complaints that they're going to get as soon as they rent a renovated unit, and the tenant walks into that, and maintenance work just got 3 times harder. Your reviews just got 4 times worse.
And
I can do it right the first time.
You know, I mean, and there's also a part of this conversation that we've still never talked about, right? We need to help in the scheduling and the management of that schedule, right? One of the big mistakes that our partners make all the time is how they release units to be done. You know, they love to do batches where it's all, hey, we're going to hold until we get 15 units and we're going to dump all you want. We want them all to start on day one. So ultimately what happens there, and I've heard you say this a lot, and I kind of want you to say it again. When you give me 15 units to start on day one, what happens to the length of that time?
It doubles. 15 units require, we'll use a 160-hour renovation. 15 units requires 15 guys to complete in 1 month. But if I stagger out those start dates based upon actual move-out dates, I can do 15 units with less guys.
Well, okay, so what does that do to the overall price of the project, though? If you're able to reduce the manpower in order to produce that, wouldn't that save them money?
Would it save them money doing the same amount of units for them?
It
saves them money for downtime.
But like in the budgeting of the project, if I know that I'm going to stagger out a project and I can have I need less labor to produce it, can't we give them a better price because we don't need that much? We don't need that many people on site. Wouldn't that make sense?
Yeah.
And then what happens if you stagger it? What happens to the supply chain for them to be able to lease? Versus batches.
When they wait to give batches of units, they're just increasing the time that unit's down for before they give it to us, before we can start it. So they're already behind money.
Right.
If they stagger them out 2 days after move-out dates and they're staying on top of their schedule and giving us the units to start 2 days after, because they have to do their post-move-out inspections and all that. But if they stagger out the start dates and we start getting them within 48 hours after the move-out, we're minimizing the downtime of those units and completing them quicker.
And again, that kind of goes back into the back end hidden cost, right? You know, we keep seeing all these customers like, oh, we want to do 15 a month, great, awesome. But the other positive, if they stagger, they're constantly getting additions to their leasing ability every week. They're getting units back every week. You know, sometimes we can increase that, decrease it, whatever it may be, but that's a huge thing. And I think that I wanted to end on that, right? Because I think that's something that's very positive they need to hear. Is, yeah, there's an upfront mistake that keeps getting made. You keep hiring the wrong people. But the way that you're scheduling, the way you're going through the process, I think is something that probably deserves a longer conversation, just not for today. You know, listen, Mike, I know you're busy. I know you got a lot of projects you're working on, and you got a lot of guys. And I want to thank you for coming on the podcast because I think the information you gave was tremendous. So, Mike, thank you. Really appreciate it.
You still owe me a beer.
100%. I'll get you that beer for this. Hey, but thank you, everyone. Stay tuned for the next episode. We'll be talking about more hidden costs.
Thanks for listening to this month's episode of Multifamily with Mosley. Head on over to LinkedIn using the hashtag #HowToFindTheRightTeam for your project to see more discussions based off this subject. And then join us next month for our episode all about estimating and how to create your bids with Nick Heiner. We'll see you then.